Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott. Earlier this year, I reviewed the Yongnuo YN 11mm F1.8, which was the first lens from Yongnuo in their new what they call the Commander series. And they call them the Commander because they have the ability to be wirelessly controlled via an optional remote. Now they've added the new kind of addition to this series in the form of 3 new lenses that are coming: a 23mm f1.4, 33mm f1.4, which we're reviewing today, and a 56mm f1.4, all of which will be able to be used with that same remote control unit that allows you to control focus, to do A/B focus pulls, to wirelessly start video recording, things like that. A variety of different functions, and so it's quite useful. And it will these 3 lenses will be available eventually on Sony E, which I'm reviewing here, Nikon Z, and then Fuji X mount. Now these are APS-C lenses designed for APS-C or DX crop cameras, and all 3 of these platforms has a 1.5 times crop factor. So in this case, this 33mm lens has a full frame equivalent of 49.5 millimeters. So basically it's a 50mm normal lens, just to give you an idea of the angle of view. This is an incredibly feature-rich lens for right under $270. It's a lot of lens for the money, and so I think it's going to be a very compelling option if you're looking for a fast, standard prime lens that's very feature-rich, has weather sealing, a lot of bang for your buck for your APS-C camera. Sound interesting? Well, let's find out more right after a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Fantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Fantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.fantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So as noted, this is a normal 50mm-ish type lens. The full name here is Yongnuo YN 33mm f1.4S DA DSM WL Pro. Now that is a long mouthful of a name, but essentially, much like what Fuji does, they're kind of giving you the whole feature list in the name itself. So in this case, it's the 1.4S. S in this case refers to Sony, or the fact that it's for Sony E mount. Their DA designation means that it's an APS-C lens. DSM refers to a digital stepping motor or the autofocus system. WL refers to wireless control. And then Pro is a designation they use that essentially just means that it has upscale build and some additional features. Doesn't necessarily designate any one feature, but just kind of it's their higher grade of feature list. Now this lens, as you can see, it is still quite compact, but it is a little bit heavier than what the competing lenses, 33mm f1.4 lenses that are available. And I looked across a few platforms, considering that this is going to be available in a variety of platforms. The most direct competitor from a first party is going to be Fuji's own 33mm f1.4, a great lens by the way. But this lens is even a hair heavier than that first party lens. It's at 370 grams or 13 ounces. That Fuji lens is 360 grams. There are also some 33mm f1.4 lenses from Tokina and from Viltrox. Those weigh in typically around 270 grams, so definitely heavier than those. But as we're going to see, it's also way more feature rich and kind of value packed than any of those options. Overall dimensions here are 69 millimeters in diameter or 2.7 inches. It is 87 millimeters or 3.4 inches in length. It takes a very standard 58mm filter thread, filter size up front. And it is one of these rare lenses, only the second lens that I've actually ever tested, that has the Wi-Fi logo on the front of the lens. And the first one, of course, was from Yongnuo as well. And so the YN 33mm is the second of these that I have tested. Now, as noted, this is a feature-rich lens. So like the Fuji lens, it has an aperture ring. Unlike that Fuji lens, however, we have the option to declick the aperture, making this a little bit more of a better hybrid lens for use when doing video. And so you have the ability to have the 1/3 stop detents throughout, or you have the ability to do a smooth aperture rack without any kind of clicks. As per usual, you have a strong detent and a bigger space between f/16 and then automatic mode. If you don't like aperture rings, you can put it in A mode and control it from within the camera. Also on the side, we have a custom or function button that can be programmed to different functions from within your camera. Above that, we have a custom switch. And so that switch can be used in a couple of ways. First of all, it can just, in your kind of standard mode, it can be just your AF/MF switch essentially. And so in one mode, mode 1, you're going to have autofocus. In mode 2, going to have manual focus enabled. However, you can also use this through a little bit different sequence to set up the wireless control if you're wanting to use that function, and there is a specific sequence of powering off and holding something down that allows you to switch into that mode. Inside the lens itself, we have 9 rounded aperture blades. Down near the base of the lens, we do have a little rubber gasket that is covering a USB-C port. This is a little bit of a pain. I would prefer that actually to be on the mount itself. For one thing, it is very hard to get out unless you have very long, very sharp fingernails. It's very difficult to get anything in there to pry that free. I had to use like a very small flat screwdriver to pry that out. I have done firmware update. It did need one when I did that. The other thing, however, is even once you've pried that little gasket out, it's very small, and so it could be easy to lose. Make sure you don't, because that does provide a point. This is not weather sealed in itself, which is why the rubber gasket needs to go over it. So watch out for that. The lens itself does have weather sealing, however, a nice gasket here inside, some internal seals, and then also a flooring coating on the front element. All good. Minimum focus distance is right under 40 millimeters. However, it is a pretty pedestrian 0.10 times magnification. So not as good as Fuji, the same as either the Viltrox or Tokina lens. Not really a forte for this particular lens. We also have an included lens hood, and I will say it's just plastic. It's not metal like the lens body itself. However, it is a little bit thicker grade plastics than some of the lens hoods that I review, and so it doesn't feel particularly cheap. And so overall, no complaints about that. Bayonet's on there, nice, and there's no lock, but there's enough of a precise click there that it's not going to be moving around on you either. And so anyway, a very nice package for right under 270 US dollars. That's a lot of lens and a lot of features for the money. Now, autofocus here comes via their DSM, or digital stepping motor. I'm not entirely sure if there's any actual differentiator between a digital stepping motor and the more typical STM or stepping motor. However, I will say this is a good focus motor after a firmware update. When I initially got the lens, probably pre-retail firmware, it wasn't fully compatible with my cameras. After I did the firmware update, it works fantastic. I found it to be fast, I found it to be quiet, I found it to be accurate. As you can see here, it's not instantaneous, but there's very little lag between even close and distant subjects. Back and forth went great. I happened to be out hiking with this lens on one camera, and then on the other camera I actually had the Sony 50mm F1.4 G Master on a Nikon body via the Megadap adapter that I just released a review of recently. And what I found is that while autofocus was often quite good with that combination on Nikon, if it was a closer focus subject, it could be really frustrating. It just didn't want to grab it. And so I had, worked until I finally got the shot that I wanted with that, through a little bit of manual override and all that. I switched over to this camera and took the exact same shot with the YN 33mm, and it was just such a pleasant relief that it just instantly locked on what I wanted it to, the closer focus subject, got accurate focus, and it was able to nail that shot. I also got very good results when shooting portraits with this lens, and that included, I did a lot of shooting through branches, trying to get unique frames and looks as a part of the portrait series, and again, always just very accurate autofocus, right on the eye, everything, even shooting at f1.4 continually, I got very accurately focused results. On the video side of things, I found that my video pulls were good. There is some focus breathing, but it's not strong. And so I saw good results going back and forth, good confidence there. My hand test was mostly good. It did stick a few times on my face didn't transition to the hand, even though the face was well obscured by the hand. But for the most part, it did fine. I also found that video AF in general was, largely good. And so I had zero issues overall with that as well. Just making those transitions, it's not abrupt. And it was fairly confident in focus transition. So overall, I think autofocus is pretty well executed here for an inexpensive third-party lens. Now, in terms of the optics, I'll give you an overview here, and then as always, the deep dive breakdown will be at the end of the video if you want to go deeper. This is an optical design of 11 elements in 9 groups. That includes 2 extra low dispersion elements, 4 high refractive index elements, and so over half the elements are exotic elements. The MTF chart is solid. It's not incredibly sharp in the center, but you can see that it is sharp and quite consistent across the frame, not any kind of big dips. I found, to me, the biggest optical issue with the lens was that there is some fringing, longitudinal style chromatic aberration. It is somewhat conditioned upon the shooting scene. And so in some places, it didn't seem all that bad. But for example, when shooting these lenses and shooting that lens designation on the front of the lens, I found that there's definitely some fringing in that lettering. And then also you can see some fringing around specular highlights, bokeh balls in the background. I did not see any kind of lateral style chromatic aberrations near the edge of the frame, so that helps in overall sharpness when shooting landscapes, for example. For those of you that are interested in whether or not this is going to cover the full frame image circle, I can assure you that it does not. And so you can see here that there is a pretty fair portion of the full frame image circle that is not covered by this lens. This is an APS-C lens. That's how you're going to want to use it. I was actually surprised that it had a little bit more distortion than what I expected. For a normal lens, which is not typically a hard engineering for distortion, there was actually a +9 of barrel distortion, a +9 to correct. Vignette was moderate. It took a +57 to correct, about 2 stops. And so not terrible there, but definitely more barrel distortion than what I expected. My chart test looked good, but not exceptionally good at f1.4. And you can see here that across the frame, contrast doesn't look amazing. And I would say that contrast at f1.4 is not fantastic. However, in many kind of real world shots, it looked better to me than what it suggested on the chart. For example, for portrait work, you can see here that there's plenty of resolution in contrast on the faces, about as much as what you would like. You will see a contrast boost at f2. You will see a further improvement, as you can see here, by f2.8. Part of that is because fringing is reducing and contrast and detail is increasing. By the time you get to landscape apertures, it is sharp all across the frame. Good results there. You will find that, as per usual, diffraction will start to set in around f11, and then by f16, which is minimum aperture, their diffraction is a little bit more obvious there. And so I typically use kind of f11 as my upper limit when I'm personally shooting. The bokeh quality is really quite good from this lens. In most all situations, I found that it was fairly creamy. I liked the look of it. Sometimes in some of those transition zones, a little bit more edging than what I would like, but that's typical of most lenses except for the truly exceptional ones in that regard. I also found that flare resistance was fairly good, mostly good. I did get some very minor ghosting in this shot, but even when the sun is right out of frame and quite intense, you can see that there's no veiling, there's no flare artifacts. And so for the most part, I found that the results were really quite good. My conclusion is this: I come away really amazed by how good budget lenses can be in 2024. I looked back as I kind of contemplated this and putting in perspective, and back in 2016, I reviewed a manual everything, Rokinon 21mm F1.4, Samyang. This is back before they did autofocus. There's no features at all. I mean, forget any of these things, no weather sealing, nothing. It's fully manual, no electronics, manual aperture ring, manual focus ring, that's it. And that lens cost $450, almost $200 more than what this lens does. This lens that is loaded with features, has different aperture control function button. It's got weather sealing. It can do firmware updates. All of that for less than $270. It's pretty close to a G Master feature set, has good AF, and has a fairly strong optical performance, all for $270. And considering how much inflation has increased the price of almost everything else, it's pretty extraordinary how good a value a lens like this really is. And so if you're looking for a normal nifty 50 type lens for your APS-C camera, this is a really compelling package. It's got a lot going on for it, and it worked really, really well. I have no problem giving it a recommendation. If you want more information, you can check out my full text review, which is linked in the description down below. Also a linkage there to an image gallery and some buying links. And now, if you want a deeper dive into the optical performance, stay tuned with me. Let's jump into that together.
So we'll start by taking a look at vignette and distortion. So as far as the distortion point, as noted, there's a surprising amount of barrel distortion for a 50mm style lens. However, as you can also see, it is quite linear, not difficult to correct. That's a +9 to correct for that. As far as the vignette, it is more solid there in the corners, as you can see, but again, it corrected pretty cleanly. I used a +57 there in the corners. You can see here that there is some fairly pronounced fringing, longitudinal style chromatic aberration, so some magenta style fringing before and then a blue-green after the plane of focus. Some images didn't do too bad. You know, for example, this, although there's some shiny surfaces, yeah, you can see a little bit of green fringing here and there, but nothing that is really pronounced. A tiny bit on the specular highlights there, but again, not very strong. In this image, however, you can see the fringing is considerably stronger. You can see that fringing in this lettering here on various outlines on the SLR, and then around the specular highlights, you can see that green fringing there as well. Now, lateral style chromatic aberrations, not a problem. There is the tiniest little hint of them there, but this is at about 200% magnification. You're not going to see that in the real world at all, so not a problem. So I look at the chart test. This is at 26 megapixels on Sony, which is currently the highest level of resolution that we've got available. This is showing these results at 200% magnification. So we can see in the center of the frame, good detail that is there. Contrast isn't off the charts good, and so some of the fine textures are not quite as resolved as what I would like. Mid-frame result is really quite similar, not far off there. Down in this zone, we can see some drop off from up here to down here, just a little bit less contrast there, and that's going to play out into the corners where, again, there still remains a pretty decent amount of detail there, but contrast isn't, knock your socks off good. To put this in real-world perspective, however, even at f1.4, I feel like that is plenty of detail for everyone. I think that no problem there. At portrait distances, I thought it was actually pretty great. Here's another shot here, and so you can see, again, punching into 100% magnification, good detail everywhere, good contrast, a good-looking result overall. If we compare f1.4 to f1.8 here in the center of the frame, we can see that there's definitely an uptick in the contrast, particularly when it comes to the shadow areas. Black levels are definitely lower and thus giving more detail. Same happens here to where you can just see that the contrast is better. Look at this writing along here and then compare it over here. Definitely crisper looking. And you can see that result, it does very, very slightly influence what we see in the corner of the frame as well. Again, for some real-world perspective, you can see kind of the trade-offs here. So if we take a look here in the center of the frame, you can definitely see that there is darker levels of contrast, thus the detail pops a little bit better on this. At the same time, I think that f1.4 looks pretty decent, and of course the trade-off is if you step back, you can see that the background is just a little bit harsher at f1.8. It's not as defocused as we see at f1.4, and so specular highlights aren't quite as soft. So I would say if I were doing that trade-off, in most cases, I would say I can live without that if I can get this and then also a softer background. So I don't really have any complaints about the overall detail and contrast in real-world images. So there is further contrast improvement at f2 and then more still at f2.8. We can see that as we move towards the mid-frame, by f2.8, that's really starting to look really good. A marked difference from this to that at f2. Other side of the frame, it's the same thing. You can see that looks okay, but this is looking now really, really good. We can see if we look at a few other places that now corner performance looking quite good there. Definitely much improved here in this lower right corner and then on this upper left corner. You can see a pretty consistent result there, some good centering. Now, by the time you hit f4 and f5.6, you're getting into peak performance all across the frame. You can see detail and contrast is really good everywhere. Here's a real-world example at f5.6. We can see if we look in the center of the frame, look at all the detail I love in these dead trees here. You can just see really crisp details. And then as we look right off here to the very edge of the frame and in the shadow area, all of that looks really, really good. Fantastic. As per usual, you're going to see that detail continue through f8 at f11. Some slight softening due to the effects of diffraction by f16, which is minimum aperture. You're going to see that the image is considerably softer, and that's due to the effects of diffraction. Now, as noted previously, our maximum magnification is not really very exceptional, 0.10 times, quite low. However, you can see that the up-close detail and contrast is really pretty good. You can also see that we've got a pretty flat plane of focus holding off right towards the edges of the frame. I felt that the overall blend of sharpness and then bokeh is pretty good from this lens. Again, it looks good on the subject, but the background looks nice and soft. Here in this shot here, got frost crystals on the grass. And you can see that, yeah, there's some kind of prismatic effect there, but as it transitions towards creamy really quite well. This shot here too, you got some in the transition zone here, but it really doesn't look too bad. Again, the subject looks good. Overall image, I think, looks pretty fantastic. Now, in this shot, I want to highlight two things. First of all, the bright sun is just right there, right out of this frame. But you can see the contrast and detail is held up pretty well. And then in this shot here, the sun being right here, you can see a little bit of a ghosting artifact in this zone here. Overall, however, the image has held up well. And so I think that it handles flare reasonably well also. Overall, outside of some fringing and a bit of distortion, really not a bad optical package for the money. So thanks for watching until the very end. I hope the deep dive into the optics has given you the full picture, and so you can decide whether or not the Yongnuo 33mm f1.4 is a lens for you. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.